welcome to Pesto Comics Audio Edition. This is the entry for March 1st, 2024. In for the long haul. What can save comics, if they even need saving? Before we get into it, I've got two pieces of business to mention. First, a short story I've written called Chop 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 is up as a finalist for publication in Writer's Digest magazine. I'd love if you can go vote. The link is at www.writers-digest.com/wd-competitions/your-story-128. You can find a link in the post on Substack. Secondly, I want to let you know about a really cool project that I'm involved in. It's called Archetypes, an independent geek culture magazine. This is a biannual zine in the spirit of Wizard magazine, but with an indie comics focus. It has really cool short comics, articles, and previews within. This is the first issue, so you have a really good chance to get in on the ground floor. It's on Kickstarter right now. For my contribution, if you've been following me on any social media at all, you've come across my daily writing tools posts. This first issue of Archetypes contains my first long-form entry of those writing tools. This time, I talk about brainstorming and first drafts and really just getting started. So if you've enjoyed this newsletter or any of those posts that I've put up, you'll really enjoy this article and everything else that's included. And now, on with this week's entry. The fallacy of comics are dying. I don't have my head in the sand about the state of the comics industry. It's not going gangbusters for sure. Times have been better. Times where we didn't need Funko Pops to keep stores afloat or 400 variant covers to boost sales. But to say that comics are suddenly going to disappear from the face of the earth is a fallacy. There's always going to be room for the medium. It's too accessible an art form to go away entirely. That's not to say what we classify as a comic today won't change in the near future. Perhaps the floppy's still dying. I've talked about how although I collect floppies week to week, most of my reading is done in two formats, digital or in premium print versions. Even then, I don't think that shift is as close as it may seem. The emerging market on Kickstarter still seems to favor that serialization, even if it seems otherwise elsewhere. Ditto for Webtoons. Kickstarter aside, it's hard to argue that price point doesn't cause a lot of problems. Comparing the 90s boom to today is never fair, but a comic in 1994, let's pick Action Comics 698, would be $1.50 on the newsstand for 32 pages. Accounting for inflation, that's about $3.10 today. If we look at Action Comics 1061, that goes for $4.99. It's just a couple dollars more than it should be, sure, but with all the competition out there for entertainment, being more expensive isn't going to be what wins you over new fans. And pricing is just one factor. Competition from all kinds of new platforms definitely doesn't help. TikTok just wasn't an option in 1994. It's not like younger generations aren't reading sequential stories at all anymore either. Manga doesn't count. When you hear that comics are doing better than ever, that's also not entirely true. Manga is bolstering the boom that isn't necessarily translating to Western comics. Go into any bookstore and you'll see a manga rack that dwarfs that of the shelves carrying the big two. It's a very tiring debate that was on Twitter recently too. A rising tide lifts all boats for sure, but there's a clear distinction between the two mediums right now, and it's not just how you read it. Not to harp on pricing, but manga is relatively cheap. The new generation isn't reading Shonen Jump on a weekly basis, at least not in stores. They're picking up cheap printed volumes that contain a dozen issues per. When you factor that in, we're getting closer to those 1994 prices. I've posted about how DC is experimenting with that format this spring, and I'm hoping this takes off as a big shift in the industry. It's a format I've tinkered with myself, and will be in the future. The only problem with their approach is that it's missing what comics does best: long, uninterrupted runs. Learning from what works. It's a fact that new number ones always sell. It's a jumping on point for new and lapsed readers, but it's also a great jumping off point. The one thing that Western comics and manga alike do that no other medium can replicate is have stories that span for years. Arguably soap operas and professional wrestling do this too, but I digress. We live in a binge culture. TV shows that normally wouldn't win awards or catch any special attention are getting huge boosts just for having a prolonged story for fans to get absorbed by. Being able to go back and follow a story that was years in the making in a weekend makes some creators cringe, but it's actually a wonderful thing. There's an insatiable hunger for content like never before. Comics are in a wonderful position to leverage that with years of uninterrupted storytelling to provide readers. It just needs to be made easily accessible. Hunger for nostalgia. To read an entire run of Action Comics would take forever, but it's also impossible. Physical collections are expensive and only offer a spattering of random issues. Even DC Universe Infinite has large gaps, even more so with modern runs. Using back catalogs and giving folks a sense of what there is to dig into is a huge, untapped advantage waiting to be exploited. This is what works in manga right now. I can go back and read every issue of Dragon Ball or One Piece with very few obstacles getting in my way. It's all there for the taking. Western comics have made it overly complicated with various versions of collections that have different issues within. Simplifying the reading orders, providing as much material as possible, and adapting to the new market is what's going to turn things around. Rethink and rebirth. I've made the case for serialization and for large collected volumes. Both can coexist with some tinkering. Serialization allows for some room to see how a book is doing and to adjust accordingly, rather than the all-or-nothing approach that shifting to trades only would be. Arguably, as a fan, you're getting the best of both worlds right now. You can trade weight if that's your preference, but it feels like we're holding on to something that won't be here 10 years from now. There's also a lot of books coming out right now. Given that the market is supposedly shrinking, though I don't know that's entirely true, we seem to be cutting up the pie into smaller and smaller pieces. That's why I think bigger companies with a lot in the catalog, like DC or Marvel, could try returning to their roots. Weekly magazine-style books containing serialized stories like Shonen Jump or 2000 AD. It allows for long runs in books while still leaving room for the new works. Big names next to small emerging ones. Everyone is getting all the stories, so there's always an opportunity to build new characters and stories that wouldn't get a chance in their own $4.99 book. Then, much like what's happening with digital first books, these can be collected into their own floppies or collected editions. The point is, there's lots of opportunity to experiment. Doing what we're doing now seems to be demonstrating diminishing returns, so I'm looking forward to some radical ideas. Comics aren't going anywhere, but they might be overdue for a shift. And that's it for this week's post, so let's talk about what's next. March 15th, Sense of Community, Where to Make Friends in Comics and Outside. And April 1st, FOMO, Part 1, Toronto Comic Con. Just a fan, hopefully for the last time. I want to thank you again for listening, I always appreciate it. If you have any feedback, feel free to comment on the newsletter at the Substack, or feel free to email me, adriano@pestocomics.com. Once again, thank you very much. Can't wait to talk to you in a couple weeks. Have a good one.